Well, I've been looking forward to today's discussion for quite some time. I happened to meet Jason and Chris, and I started having a conversation with them, and I was sort of like, hey, I can tell you right now, let's schedule a discussion with the two of you because I want to do this with our community. So let me welcome Chris Frank and Jason Cow to the stage. And Jason, did I just botch your last name? How do you pronounce it?
It's pronounced Quo, but
Whoa,
I appreciate the attempt.
Yeah. So today our discussion is why products for older adults come up short and what we can do to fix them, which I think is going to be set up to be a fascinating discussion. But before we dive into that, let's get to know the two of you a little bit. Jason, tell us a little bit about your background, and then Chris, we'll hear about you, and then we'll dive into this.
Yeah, that sounds great. And Steve, thanks so much for having us with Positive Aging today. We're huge fans of these sessions. I know you capture everything from, mobility to senior living and contracts, even to, these amazing products such as Zine, as we saw recently. But folks, my name is Jason Quo. I'm one of the co-founders of Snowday. We're a research services company that specializes in product development for the older adult and caregiver markets. My other co-founder, Chris, is joining today, and our third co-founder, Julie, she's in Switzerland, so she's a few hours ahead of us and won't be joining today. But my background is really in product management, so design, develop, and deployment of products. I started my career at Disney. After that was at a hypergrowth startup. We ended up on Inc. 500 as the fastest growing company in America, but that really exposed the importance of user-centered design and product research. Following that, I was at Alphabet, both at Google and Verily, our sister company focused on health tech, where that really developed my sense of passion and purpose for the older adult population. That's also where Chris and I serendipitously overlapped, and I'll turn it over to Chris.
Oh man, that's great. Yeah, Chris, tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, absolutely. So my background's mostly in applied social science. I started off working in healthcare and consumer packaged goods market research. I went to grad school after that thinking I was going to become a sociology professor, but I started a company instead, which is kind of a weird thing for like a PhD student to do, just because I realized how much it felt so much more meaningful, and there was so much more traction you could get on important problems by trying to make solutions as opposed to writing papers. And so anyway, I was a little disaffected with academia. From there, I went to Google, where I worked as a user experience researcher for about 8.5 years there, and at Verily, which is the health tech sister company to Google, designing and developing medical devices, many of which were made for older adults or intended to be made for older adults. And it was really, as Jason kind of mentioned, it was really kind of at that time, we had a company with a lot of resources, kind of endless resources, and the ability to do things the right way. And you still found that a lot of the products we were making were kind of coming up short when it came to what we could do for older adults. And that's when we said, hey, there's got to be a better way to do this sort of thing. And that's when Jason and I, and Julie, we decided to found Snowday, which again, as Jason mentioned, we're really focused on building better products for older adults.
I love it. And what I really love is how I love it when we get people thinking about older adults that came from different backgrounds, especially technology and innovation, because so often the older adults are ignored by that sort of Silicon Valley innovation segment. It just happens by accident. And a great example for those in the audience that didn't see it on or weren't with us on Tuesday, I'll drop it into chat. Jason alluded to it. We had a discussion with the inventor of this product, this Zine mobility product. And Garrett is, this Hall of Fame inventor that invented those sky cams that you see on the NFL games. And, now he's devoting his energy to helping older adults and people with disabilities. So this is really exciting. Like I said, I've been looking forward to this. So I'm going to duck behind the curtain here and let you guys take it away. I'm going to remind our audience that we want this to be interactive. These two are great at making an interactive discussion. But so feel free to chime in and type in your questions as we go. So take it away, guys.
Sounds great, Steve. I'm also going to follow you behind that curtain. Turn it over to Chris, and I'll rejoin later for the Q&A.
Right. Yeah, thanks, guys. All right, I'll just get my presentation up and running here. So hopefully you guys can see this at this point. So yeah, we're really excited to talk to this group about, why products for older adults come up short, which I'm sure many of you are very familiar with, but hopefully kind of paint a picture about where we can go from here in order to make something to basically chart a path forward that leads us and ends us up in a better position when it comes to the products that are available for older adults. I will say, we have our own spin on a lot of the ideas here, but we're standing on the shoulders of giants, and we'll mention a few of them as we're going through. And I'm sure there are a number of you also looking and saying, hey, what are these young guys going to be able to teach us about, building products for older adults? And I think the first part, and we'll get more into this too, is just admitting your ignorance when it comes to these things. That's maybe the number one thing. And so we're always trying to be humble and recognizing how much we have to learn, which again, you'll see is a bigger and bigger part of the message that we wanted to share today. So I'm going to start first with an example. So talking about one of the most successful products of the 21st century. So got 9 straight JD Power and Associates awards. This product is the all-time best-selling device in its category. And it was named the 2007 Invention of the Year, according to Time. I should have mentioned this too. By the way, we're going to try and treat this as a conversation. So if you've got questions as we're going along or other things like that, then please, feel free to chime in on the Q&A or in the chat. But any guesses on what this product might be, just based on this, feel free to just drop it in the chat. All right, Richard, you're getting the prize, because this is the first guess is the right one, which is the iPhone. This has been heralded as one of the most influential inventions of the 21st century. It is, one of the best-selling, products that's been out there. And it's really just won accolade after accolade after accolade. But when we look at this device that has been so successful in the market, and everybody widely saying this is like one of the best things that we've done in this millennium, it comes up short for older adults in a number of different ways. And one of the things that all 3 of us at the company do is we like to volunteer our time when we're not doing, working on products for older adults, and we do a lot of tech support. And I wish I had a nickel every time somebody came in asking questions about how to use their iPhone when we're trying to help people. And so, a few of the problems. One, the default text size on this thing is really small. And even when you're using the accessibility features that make text larger, sometimes that makes other parts of the product experience wonky. Another thing that's difficult, so on computers, we still have this, but the undo button or the undo action, this was actually something that Apple pioneered back in the day, but they got rid of it when they went to iOS. For a long time, there was no undo for an action that you didn't want or when you had an outcome and you wanted to go back. There now is a way to do undo, but you have to actually shake the device to get it to do that, which isn't super intuitive. And it's not implemented everywhere in experiences across iPhone either. So you could be sitting there shaking your phone being like, well, is it not detecting my shaking, or is it just not set up for this? It's not a very good way to kind of correct mistakes. And then probably the biggest problem is there is no user manual for this thing. And there are all sorts of different interactions that are not obvious just by looking at it. Things that are hidden controls that aren't easy to find. You'll go into a new app and you'll get like a really brief onboarding on, hey, how this works. And then after that, if you forget what they told you in the onboarding, good luck. And then, it's really difficult to discover what those different controls are. And this leads to a lot of trial and error. And again, it's really kind of reliant on a lot of knowledge that maybe digital natives have when it comes to this technology, but is not readily apparent for people who didn't grow up with devices like this. And so And it's really surprising too, because Apple is a company that used to be, really pride itself on how usable their products were. They invented the computer mouse, which, now is commonplace, but was actually a way to make the use of a computer much more intuitive. They coined the term and invented the idea of a desktop, which, they outline, in the home screen of your computer, all these things that are meant to kind of mimic an actual physical desk. And these were design choices that they made when they were making these machines that were meant to make them more usable for people. And over time, Apple's really gotten away from that and has leaned much more into visual elegance and visual simplicity. I mean, their products are beautiful, but they've really done that by sacrificing a lot of the usability that would make these products easier to use. So today's products really are failing older adults, and there are a couple of different ways in which they're failing. One problem is that products are not usable for older adults. So what does that mean? That means, you can sit down and you want to complete a certain task with a piece of technology, but you can't figure out how to do it, or it's difficult to do. And just, I guess, if we have any guesses out there, what proportion of older adults, would you say, or adults over 50, would you say, wish they had a better grasp of technology? Any guesses? I'm looking for a percentage on this one. Adults over age 50 who wish they had a better grasp on technology. Any guesses? And again, I'm monitoring the chat here. It's 75, 90, 95%, 90, 100. So this is a survey done from AARP, and this is 54% admitted they want a better grasp of the technology devices they already own. So these are things that people already have. And I think, you'd see that percentage go up if it was devices people didn't own. Hey, I wish I knew more about, I don't know, the metaverse or cryptocurrency or whatever the new technology is. It's like, yeah, I think you'd find a lot of people who are more interested there. But this 54%, and that's people over age 50. 50 is not that old. That's pretty young these days. And, I think that number would go up an awful lot if you're looking at folks that were, say, over age 70 or over age 80. And then you've also got 37% saying they lack confidence when using technology that has otherwise become prevalent in their lives. And the other thing too is a lot of times on surveys like this and self-reports, people can be a little hesitant to admit to these sorts of things, right? It's kind of like, oh, you don't know what's going on. You're a dinosaur. There's all these negative stereotypes that go along with even admitting that you don't know how to use some of these things. And so, again, I would surmise, like many of you in the chat, that these percentages would probably be a lot larger if phrased a little bit differently. A couple of and one quote that we've got here to kind of reinforce this point. And again, I'm going to be picking on Apple a lot in this presentation, but this is a quote from Don Norman, who's kind of the founder of a lot of design philosophy and how to make products. And he actually used to be a former VP at Apple. And he says, today, Apple's products violate all the fundamental rules of design for understanding and usability. As a result, even a manual is not enough. All the arbitrary gestures that control tablets, phones, and computers have to be memorized. Everything has to be memorized. And this is such a obvious point that's overlooked all the time when people are designing these things. They're kind of assuming a certain user who has a certain background knowledge and who's already memorized some of this stuff. But for people who are newer to it, it's really difficult. And so that brings us, to a couple of examples here. So this is one of my pet peeve examples for the iPhone. For those of you who see this here, many of you may not have seen this screen if you own an iPhone. This is what's called the control center. And this is this really handy feature where you can toggle on and off different quick things that you might be interested in getting at for your phone. All sorts of customizable controls here. It's meant to be really convenient, but the thing is, it's hidden in the top right-hand corner of your iPhone. You've got to pull down to show that this control center is even here. And this is just a great example. There's no way to know this. There's nothing on the screen when you're on the home screen to suggest that this is here. It's a way of hiding this functionality in a way where you just have to know. You just have to memorize that there's a certain control there. And this is true for iPhone. It's true for Android devices too, but they've really kind of leaned more into this visual simplicity at the expense of being able to use things. Another example of a technology that's not built well for older adults, or is really difficult to use, are just touch screens in general. So the way that these touch screens work, most modern touch screens are what's called capacitive touch screens. And that means that when you are pushing your finger onto an area on, whether it's your phone or your tablet, Apple Watch, whatever it is, it's detecting where your finger is because it closes a little circuit using the moisture that's on the tips of your fingers in order to close that circuit. It's a brilliant technology for a lot of folks, but one big problem is that as you get older, that moisture that's on your hands become a little bit drier. And so what it means is that oftentimes you'll be touching on these capacitive touchscreens and it won't actually close that circuit because there's not enough moisture on your finger. And so you end up in these situations where the people who are least likely to have grown up with technology and understand how it's used have the most difficult time even doing simple things like tapping on a screen. And this is just a terrible design choice if you're trying to build for diverse groups of people. And so this is just another way that devices are just plain less usable for older adults. The second problem, actually, before we go that, any other products, and feel free to just chime in the chat. Can you name any other products that are not usable for older adults? Any other products that are just really failing right now? And again, I've been picking on Apple a lot. There's tons of them out there. I got smartwatches in here. Any others? Smart TVs, right? You're hiding, you've got that remote with all those buttons on there. You got to somehow find where the menu is to do something or be able to navigate across different apps on your TV. It's really difficult. Remote controls, absolutely. Home design, yes, absolutely. There's so much to be done to be able to make better homes for older adults. Hey, I live in a townhome that's got multiple stories here, and there's no way you can get up and down that. Yeah. Setting up routers, anything having to do with Wi-Fi is really tricky. But anyway, there's just littered with products that are difficult to use. And now the next problem for why products are failing older adults is that a lot of products that are made for older adults, where product designers are sitting down and saying, hey, we want to make this thing for this population, for older adults, tend to really emphasize limitations. So you end up with these certain products that people just don't want to be associated with because they're overly medicalized. They make them feel old. So a couple of examples here. Only 20% of people who would benefit from a hearing aid actually seek them out. Now that's a crazy stat right there, because it's like being able to hear people is like a fundamental part of being able to communicate with others. It's been linked to, if you lose your hearing, it's been linked to like early onset dementia and things like that. Like being able to do language, communicate with others is so important. Yet you see people who would benefit from these devices turning away from them. Why is that? Well, it's probably because it's really visible and it really shows. It's like, oh man, when you buy it, it's like, oh man, I really feel like I'm old because I have to buy this thing. And so you end up with all these people struggling because they just don't want to be confronted with these devices that make them feel really old, that aren't designed to look nice. Another example is only 2% of people over age 65 use emergency response devices. So think like Life Alert, even though the technology could be life-saving. 2%, and that's another thing where it's like buying a Life Alert is just going to make you feel like, oh my gosh, I'm being monitored now. If I fall, my family is going to be really worried, and of course I'm worried about falling and hurting myself and not being able to reach someone. But it's just the mental hit that you take when you have to buy one of these devices is really tough. A couple of other examples in this category, or another quote, I guess, that kind of illustrates this. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. So this is from Joseph Coughlin. He's the head of MIT Age Lab, which does a lot of really cool work promoting better product development for older adults. And he says, history gives us many examples of such failed products, from age-friendly cars to blended foods to oversized cell phones. In every example, product designers thought they understood the demands of the older market, but underestimated how older consumers would flee any product giving off a whiff of oldness. And so it's like, hey, if I'm being typecast by this product, I am not interested. So another couple examples here, when we talk about, mobility devices, these are devices that, if you look at these, you think like, oh, this is like a hospital. Someone's like not not doing great just by looking at some of these things. And this is kind of absurd because if you think about like let's say a cane, for example, a cane used to be a fashion accessory. It used to be the sort of thing, and there's still stylish canes out there, but man, it's become medicalized. But now, it used to be a way of showing how stylish you were. And now, you just find a lot of these canes are built purely for, medicalized functionality, as opposed to really being able to express personality, make people feel like, hey, this is really a reflection of who I am, as opposed to just being, again, typecast as someone who's getting old. Another example, would be life alert pendants, and it's interesting. These actually have gotten a lot better over the years, and now you can find ones that actually look a lot nicer. But if you're looking at some of these classic ones, some of these pucks, some of the wrist worn ones, a lot of times people want to wear the one around their neck because you can put it under your clothes and no one else will know it's there. People are really hesitant to kind of, like the wrist worn ones, it's like, hey, you're advertising like that you're wearing a life alert and that you're at risk of falling. And these are the sorts of things that people just really, it just doesn't feel good to use them. People feel like they're being, kind of cornered into a certain way of expressing themselves with a lot of these sorts of things. So any other products out there? Again, we're going to toss this one back out to the audience. Any other products out there that they really emphasize limitations? Can you think of things that's like, man, I know that could be useful, or the intent's in the right place, but there's no way I'm getting that because it's going to make me feel old, or it's going to make my loved one feel old, or people just aren't picking it up. Lift chairs, yeah, that's another one, right? Very visible in your home. Door access systems for apartment buildings. You're sophisticated with cameras. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. You see those sorts of things, and if you don't know how to use them, it makes you feel really, really out of place. Absolutely. So yeah, so those are two of the main problems why we're failing older adults. The products are not usable for older adults, and things that are made for them, your clothing designs is another one. Hey, I'm going to wear this adaptive clothing, but it doesn't look very good. It makes it look, it's not my style. I've been a stylish person my whole life, or I've cared about that sort of thing, and now you're forcing me to wear these things that don't really express me. So those are the two problems: usability, and then these devices that are made for them emphasizing limitations. So why is it then? What is it that's leading to this outcome where you end up with these problems that you see in product development? So the big one is that we aren't taking the time to understand what older adults want and need. And this is a Dilbert cartoon here that I'm just going to read through. Dilbert says here, hey, we interviewed hundreds of users and turned all their suggestions into features. As it turns out, every user we talked to was an idiot, and their dumb suggestions ruined our product. In hindsight, we probably should have talked to people who work outside this building. And this is a tongue-in-cheek reference, actually, to a really brilliant quote from this well-known entrepreneur in Silicon Valley named Steve Blank. And he says, there are no facts inside your building, so get outside. And this is one of the fundamental reasons why a lot of these products for older adults aren't ending up the way that we want them to be. Is that product developers are not their users, and they're not learning enough about their users as they're going through and making their devices. So and this is true. This is especially true for young folks like us who are going through and making products. But this is also true. I don't want to diminish how many older adults out there who are entrepreneurs themselves and are making things. But even for the folks that are making those products, one of the fundamental things you need to do if you're going to do good product development is be humble about what it is that you know and what you don't know about the problems you're trying to solve and the people you're trying to serve. And that's true across the board. Again, it's especially true when designing for older adults, largely because, again, there are these big physiological barriers. Your vision deteriorates, your hearing decreases, there are touch limitations that we were talking about earlier. And again, these are things that are difficult for younger people who tend to be making a lot of these things to relate to. And then, there's also just this big knowledge gap that we've discussed too. There's this insufficient exposure to technology. Many older adults are learning for the first time. And so when a lot of these product designers, engineers are building things, it's really easy to get to make certain assumptions about how people are going to use your product. Because you're something that might be as easy as breathing air for someone in their 20s and using Snapchat or whatever is just not going to be intuitive for older adults. So what can we do? So the solution that we think to this is to approach product development with what's called user-centered design. Now, this is something that's been around for a while. You know, we definitely didn't come up with this, and it's a way of doing product development that really puts people at the center of what it is that you're making. So I'm going to give a definition here. So user-centered design is an iterative design process in which designers focus on the users and their needs in each phase of the design process. In UCD, design teams involve users throughout the design process via a variety of research and design techniques to create highly usable and accessible products for them. So we're just going to break this down a little bit here. So on the left is the definition we just read, but I'm just going to focus on a few of these key kind of concepts of the definition. So the first is an iterative design process. So we say iterative, it means that whatever you think of first is almost certainly wrong. And in order to get something that is more right and less wrong, you have to iterate on it. That means you have to make something, you have to get feedback on it, you have to change the thing in response to that feedback. And you've got this loop here where it's like, hey, we've got an idea. What's the feedback on that idea? All right, how do we incorporate that into what it is that we're making? So it has to be iterative. You can't just, you know, sit back and make something the first time, design something once and expect it to actually work. It's this you know, and again, this goes back to being humble and recognizing, hey, we're going to be wrong in a lot of places. The next is focus on the users and their needs. So this is fundamental, right? Is knowing what problem it is you are trying to solve before you go out and build the solution. And this is one thing, having worked at really big tech companies that have had really successful products, you still see this happen a lot, which is that products will get made without understanding really the fundamental aspects of the problems that are being solved. There'll be assumptions about how things are going to be used, et cetera, but there won't be a really foundational understanding of who you're making this thing for, very specifically, and what problems it's going to solve for them. And then finally, you want to do all of this in each phase of the design process. And I'll get to that in a second, but that means you're not skipping ahead. You're always going through and doing things in an iterative manner. And you're always focusing on the user and their needs as you're going through the process of building these products. So this is kind of these are the 5 phases of the user-centered design process. There's research, concept, design, develop, and test. In your research phase, this is before you even made anything, before you have, ideally this is happening before even the idea for a product is a glimmer in your eye. You're like, hey, I want to make something that's going to help to reduce falls for the elderly. You know, yeah, I haven't settled on a pendant that's going to be worn around the neck. I haven't settled on any particular, you know, technology, but I know I want to address this problem. You go out and you try and learn about how people are experiencing that problem. You learn what it is that they're going to need from a solution in order for that solution to be successful. You're really trying to identify your product requirements in that phase. Then when you go into the concepting phase, you'll start to identify, like, okay, what are the possible directions? What are the possible solutions out here? And this is before you're really building things. You're like sketching things, you're brainstorming, coming up with different ideas that may or may not work, or that you may not even, you know, end up testing further, but you're really just trying to think, hey, what's a concept here? The design phase is where you've got designers who are sitting down and saying, okay, what are the nitty gritty about how these screens are going to look like? What's the industrial design shape of this thing going to look like if it's a piece of hardware? You know, we haven't put any guts in it to make it work, but what's this thing? How's it going to work? What's it going to look like? Then you're developing it. This is where engineers are coming into play to actually make the thing. And then you're testing it. And this is really important too, is you're not necessarily going through and getting to this test at the end with your final product. You're trying to maybe get to that test with something that kind of illustrates the point, so you can, just enough so you can get it out into the real world and start to learn things that you wouldn't be able to learn otherwise. And throughout all of this, at each stage, and this is where kind of some of the iteration comes in, is you want to do that research. So obviously you're starting off with research. When you're in a concept phase, you're coming up with ideas. It's like, all right, let's go get feedback on those concepts. Let's start to identify where there might be barriers to using something before we've even built the thing. It's just an idea in our head. When you're designing things, you've got the design, again, you haven't technically built the thing yet. You still want to be getting that out in front of people. Hey, is this usable? Is this useful? And then when you're developing, you want to do just enough engineering work. And this is maybe one of the reasons why a lot of big organizations struggle with this, is that they get to the point where they want to build something and they go ahead and build the whole thing and spend a lot of time and money to make something. But what you really want to be doing is doing just enough engineering work to make something work enough in the real world to be able to learn from it. And you want to get to that point where you're testing in the real world and getting real world feedback. And you want to do all of this iteratively before you commercialize. And this is one of the problems with a lot of product development work as it is now, is that they'll use a style of product development called waterfall, where you're basically coming up with all your requirements at the beginning, and then it's just getting passed down from the researchers to the designers to the engineers, and they build the whole thing and then they ship it. And the problem is you're not learning as you're going along. And so there are all of these, unvalidated assumptions that are built into your product if you don't go through this iterative process. I've alluded to this a little bit, but here, just to give you a bird's eye view of who all is involved in this sort of thing. So it takes a village to make a product. There are a few main roles. So researchers, we've talked about, these are folks that are going out and doing interviews, surveys. This is what we do at Snowday, is to understand what are those needs, getting concepts out in front of people, getting different products out. When you're doing those, those kind of lower weight engineering lift tests, looking at the way that people receive this in the real world. You've got designers. It's really their job to understand, hey, what are the product requirements, and how do we design all the interactions, design the screens, make people focus on the visual design, but a lot of designers are also very much focused on how are people going to actually use this thing, and how can we make those steps easier as they're going about using it. You've got engineers who are building the thing, very critical component to the whole operation. You've got marketers who have to understand, hey, how do we best communicate the advantages of these products? How do we best assuage concerns that might be coming up that we've found previously as we've been building this thing? And you've got product managers who are kind of putting all these different sorts of things together to make sure that it's a coherent product, making sure that everybody's talking to one another and kind of thinking about the overall strategy. And again, we're going to kind of deep dive on the research portion of this, just because that's what we do at Snowday. But again, wanted to give a shout out, because there's a lot of other things that need to go well in order to make a good product. But research is one of the most fundamental parts. So user research is a systematic, evidence-based, efficient approach for increasing the odds of product success through mainly two things. One is exploring target user needs and using those insights to inform product requirements. And then after you're starting to come up with different ideas, you're evaluating a product's performance or an idea's performance to ensure it's meeting those requirements. So you want to be doing this kind of throughout the entire process. And again, I think one of the things to really emphasize here too is it's really systematic and evidence-based, which means, hey, if you're doing this right, you're planning to do iterations. You're planning to go out and get feedback from people throughout the development process. And it's evidence-based. You're going where the evidence takes you, where people are telling you to go. And this is one of the things that, again, is just so central to this whole philosophy of making things, is that, you don't know nearly as much as you do. And you've got tons to learn from people. And if you're able to maintain that humility as you go through product development, you'll recognize where you're wrong, and you'll recognize where you need to make things different. And that's all based on feedback from real people. So what does this research look like? Talked a little bit about this, but here are just some of the types of methods that you'll go about doing. So there'll be things like interviews, qualitative, small samples. You're just really understanding what are the diversity of different experience people have. Can we understand all the different factors in play with a particular phenomenon or a particular problem? Another one is concept testing. So describing a product concept through words, images, videos, or a physical prototype. This is where you haven't actually made something that people can use yet, but you've got an idea and you want to get feedback on that idea. And so you're going out and trying to understand what are the barriers that people might experience when using something. We talk about surveys. So surveys are, everybody's familiar with those, but it's really a way to understand at scale, like how prevalent are some of these attitudes and perspectives that we're observing in the qualitative research. That's really important for being able to make certain product decisions, understanding, hey, how big are certain segments, are we leaving people behind with certain product decisions? And for that, you really need to have that quantitative evidence. Usability testing is where you have people come into usually a usability lab and have them work through a set of tasks with a product or a prototype. And there you're kind of looking for, hey, where's this confusing? What about this product experience isn't going to work? This gets back to that first fundamental problem with that, why products are failing older adults, is around usability. And this usability test is saying, hey, can people use this thing? What do we need to change in order to make it so that people can use this thing? And then field tests. This is really that testing. That was that last step in the user-centered design process. This is getting out of the building. It's getting out there and putting your prototype out there in a real world scenario and trying to understand, hey, how is this going to be used? How's this going to be used out there? And learning from that. And so you're really trying to simulate that product experience. And usually you want to do that again with as little engineering as possible, because you don't want to get too far down the wrong path. So what we tend to think of user research really as a risk reduction exercise that reduces the chances of making something that doesn't meet user needs. So you can almost think about it like a compass. It's going to help ensure the resources that you spend developing a product aren't wasted. You wouldn't go into the woods not knowing where the heck you're going. A compass is really useful. It's not going to be able to plot out everything in your way. It's not going to be able to tell you everything, but it would be crazy to go out and think that you're going to be able to get anywhere if you aren't able to orient yourself towards where it is that you want to go and start to identify the obstacles that are in your path. So I'm going to walk through this graph that again just kind of talks about how best to use user research, but it's best when applied early in product development and kind of throughout that period of product development. So you can think about this. I'll just walk through with this graph here. So along our x-axis, you've got some of these phases of development. We're talking about the design phase, the develop phase, and then you're getting ready for launch. And then along the y-axis, we've got two things. One is the cost of making a change, and that's in red. And then the second in blue, we have the number of possible design alternatives. So when we're in the design phase, and it's really early, there are innumerable different possible design alternatives for how you can solve a problem. You understand the problem well enough. Hey, are we going to make an app? Are we going to make a piece of hardware? Are we going to, make a new community organization, design or something like that? All of these different potential solutions are out there. And the cost of changing from one thing to another is a lot lower at that point. You can decide to make really big wholesale changes when it comes to features of your offering, of your solution. And it's not going to cost very much because everything's all kind of theoretical. It's on paper. It's in your heads. It's not, you haven't built the thing yet. But then as you go along and you start developing this thing, you start getting engineers, building a hardware product, building a software product, then it's like it becomes more and more expensive to make those changes. And so what this means is you want to learn as much as you can early and throughout, product development, so that you're finding the big changes you need to make a little bit earlier, and you're reducing the cost of making those changes before you launch. Because the worst thing that happens is you decide, hey, right before we're ready to launch, is we need to make fundamental changes to the product. This is oftentimes why a lot of products get launched and they're not very good, is because they get to the end and they're like, oh, shoot, we really should have done things completely differently. We don't have the budget to go back and do it. Heck, let's launch it. Let's see how it does. And we'll iterate on it if it does well enough to make a second version. So, all this sounds great in theory, but there's actually some pretty good evidence to show that there is a big return on investment for user-centered design. So this, again, I'm going to ask for some guesses here. But if we have any guesses from the audience, what would you expect the return to be? And this is for a company that's doing product development, usually software and hardware, because that's where it's really expensive to do product development. But what would you say would be the return on investment for spending $1? For every $1 spent on user-centered design, how much do you think that returns to the organization in terms of value, in terms of being able to make sure, hey, we made the thing the right way, we didn't have to go back and change things? Any guesses on how much return on investment you'd get for $1 for every $1 you invest in user-centered design? Any guesses? $3.50, a 350% return, 36,000% return, or 3,600% return it would be, so 36 there. So this is a piece of research that was done by Forrester, and they found that every $1 invested in user-centered design brings 100 in return. That's a return on investment of 9,900%. When you put it that way, it starts to seem really obvious that you should be spending resources doing user-centered design. Another good example here is good user experience saves 50% of development rework time and reduces overall development time by 33 to 50% by improving decision-making processes and task prioritization. So again, the real expensive parts about product development, the most expensive parts, are that you're getting a whole bunch of engineers together to build this thing. And if they're building the wrong thing, you have to go back and change it. That gets really expensive really fast. This is, it fixes a lot of that development rework time. I've got a question from Kathleen. Why don't people who write instructions for using items, assuming these are instructions, test the instructions by having seniors attempt to follow what is written or illustrated? So Kathleen, what you're describing there is a usability test, is going through and saying, hey, can people actually complete a task here? And not enough of it is being done, or it's being done a lot of times with people where you're not conducting research with older adults. I would imagine, I would be surprised. I mean, one of two things is happening at Apple. Either they're not doing research with older adults, or they're doing those sorts of usability tests with older adults, and they're just saying, hey, you know what? We don't care. We're going to do it this way anyway. But it's a great question. You want those things to be tested. Yes. Yeah. Will they read anything at all? Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. If you throw a page of text at people, so yeah, absolutely. People might not read everything. So, but yeah. High return on investment from user-centered design. The last one I'll say here is time spent by software developers reworking a project with avoidable faults is 50%. So 50% in most product development projects, you could save 50% if you didn't have to do a lot of rework. And the cost of fixing an error after development is 100x that of fixing it before development. So this really shows you, again, if you think back to that graph, the cost of making a change before development is really low. After you develop the thing, it's 100 times higher. So I'm just going to throw out a couple of good examples of UX here and save some time for Q&A. But one is OXO Good Grips. This is an awesome product line that you've probably seen in Bed Bath & Beyonds and Targets and Walmarts all over the place. But OXO a while back decided they want to make a better vegetable peeler. So you see the one on the left. Everybody looks at that and just kind of cringes a little bit. It's uncomfortable. You think about using that thing, it's shifting in your hands. It's not easy to grip. And what they did is they went and did a user-centered design process. The handles you see in the middle are all their different iterations on a different handle. And they really wanted to make something that was going to be easier for older adults to use. They ended up with this product that you see on the right, which is this Good Grips. It was the vegetable peeler is the first one. It's since expanded to be a ton of different, a whole different product line of kitchen utensils. And what's one of the most amazing things about this particular example is they set out to make a better product for older adults. But what they found was, guess what? Nobody liked the vegetable peeler on the left, and everybody wants one with a big bulbous handle on it that's easier to grip, that feels better in your hand. You've got more control. And so this is actually a great example of what's called universal design, which is making something and kind of targeting it for the people who have the most stringent design requirements, but then finding that it actually is better for everybody else having made those improvements. So this is a great example of user-centered design in action. Another one, and this is maybe a little bit, maybe not exactly the right way, but if we think about that life alert device that we had back in the day that we were talking about earlier, that's making people feel old, and they don't really want to wear it in the right ways. Compare that to the fall detection on an Apple Watch. And I'm not saying an Apple Watch is perfect from a usability perspective, but this is something that someone can wear and not feel like they're being stigmatized, not wearing a scarlet letter saying that they're that this device is typecasting them as being old. It's making progress, at least in terms of that dimension of making people feel old by using the product. So a few key takeaways from the talk today, and we'll get into the Q&A. Products are failing older adults. They're not usable and often remind people of their limitations. And this happens because product developers make flawed assumptions about what older adults need. User-centered design can help us to address this problem by focusing on users, conducting frequent research, and iterating on potential solutions. And user-centered design has been proven to drive product success and reduce costly development time. So really quickly, we are Snowday, so we do product research for companies building products for older adults and caregivers. If you have any reason to reach out to us at all, we'd be happy to hear from you. Again, my name's Chris. My name's Chris. You can find me at chris@snowdayinnovations.com. And yeah, I think that's about all we've got. We can go to the Q&A.
Man, this was great, Chris. And I've been streaming these discussions on LinkedIn for the past month or so, And I just happened to, while you were speaking, I pulled up my phone. I was like, holy cow, I didn't realize that people were responding and having conversations on LinkedIn as well as our Zoom platform. So this is talk about user design. This is something that I'm aware of now. And I want to thank all those folks on LinkedIn that were adding content to our discussion right along with the Zoom audience. And I got to figure out how to blend the two of those together. But we got some great comments, and where is he here? Richard, Richard from the Kanega Watch was on the call, and folks, you can see his LinkedIn or his connection there. That was a product that we had that was, a different, I don't want to say better design, but a different design of the fall detection device. And so this has been great. Mary said early on in the conversation, she typed in that streaming in general is a challenge for me. I'm 80 years old. And, one of the things that we've got to get away from too, Mary, I'm not picking on you, but just because there should not be a, oh, I'm 80 and I can't do the streaming as well. We don't want this number to be an excuse on why we can or can't do something. I think, Chris, as you had alluded to, the only reason that that a lot of young kids know how to swipe on a phone is just they've seen it since they were born, So let's see. So Nancy posed a great question, and I know you sort of wrapped up on your slides, it's clear that we're not designing that with older people in mind, older adults in mind, or people with disabilities in mind. So Nancy is sort of like, what can we do to fix it? And, ideally, when we think about anything that we're doing, we run through this process that Chris has outlined, but that's not always, we don't always have that luxury. Like sometimes our bosses say, we're going to launch this new service or business or product, and it needs to be done, in the next 6 months. But what are your all's thoughts on that? Is that when we're initiating something and we're kind of limited in time and resources, what are some solutions to that?
Yeah, and that is a great question, and it's absolutely true, right? And a lot of times these business requirements are being set, or these business, the goals are being set without older adults in mind. And I guess two thoughts there. First is, if an organization is kind of like just completely glossing over this, then it's tough. You want to be able to raise awareness that, hey, this is what we're doing, and at the least you can do, you can say, hey, the way that we're doing things right now is going to, and being, at least making it very stated that, like, hey, these decisions are going to make it so that people don't have, that this certain group is going to likely be left behind. The other thing I'll say, though, that's kind of something that's a little bit more hopeful, is one thing that we've seen become a really big focal point in big tech, but also for startups for the last couple of years, is a focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's starting to include, people who are in older generations and people who are not digital natives. And I think that now is actually a really opportune time to lean into the fact that, hey, we want to be an inclusive product. Obviously, race, socioeconomic status, people of different cultural backgrounds, that all matters a lot. But one thing in addition to that, hey, also, we need to be developing things with older adults in mind. And I think now is a really good time to be able to say, hey, if we want to be an equitable product, a diverse product, an inclusive product, we have to also include older adults.
Yeah. So Ken Silverstein brought up a point. He says, are you finding that the idea people for products, ideas, and designs are being developed by older adults or younger adults? Okay, so like, who is developing these products? I mean, I certainly, over my years of having a product, Positive Aging Sourcebook, I had the good fortune to choose an editor who was in was much older than me when I first got started. And I have to say, she corrected me on my language and the things that I was writing quite often. And I think that really speaks to what you all are talking about, is we have brilliant ideas, but running them through a strategic testing process.
Yes, Steve, it really hits on one of the things you mentioned earlier, which is, when we're talking about these different types of, inclusivity, but also thinking about, there are a lot of entrepreneurs, both older adults and people of different age segments. But the key thing, and one of the things we want to impress, is really about making sure that you're getting out of the building. Just because you are, you look, feel, and smell like the population you're building for, doesn't mean you are the user. You might have a really strong bias towards a certain perspective, but the problem that you're trying to solve might be better suited with a certain type of implementation. So going back to, when you think about the types of folks that are building for older adults, we want to encourage and inspire more people to think about it, but make sure you're doing it with the representative population and being cognizant of those biases. And one thing that you mentioned earlier that I think is so powerful is, we try to eliminate age, specifically the number, from our dialogue, because oftentimes a lot of marketing, a lot of products look at it as a monolith. 65 plus is just one big aggregate, but the population could not be more different. And we like to say, as you age, you become more of who you are. As you age, you become more of yourself, more of who you want to be. There's some really powerful things in terms of thinking about, the user needs specifically, not just the demographic, psychographics, but really, what are those needs we want to solve for?
Yeah, and Anne has a great question. She says, aside from veggie peelers, what, in your opinion, are some well-decided examples of products for older people? I don't want to take the words out of, I want to share my thought on this, Anne, that any product that anybody finds intuitive and user-friendly is a great product for older adults. And I think the veggie peelers are a great example, but do you have some others in mind that that you all have seen or been a part of that that might trigger some ideas for us?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times there are these big successful products that are just usable in general and make people's lives easier. I mean, you think about things like garage door openers or microwaves that are really convenience building for everyone. Those are really great. And there are more and more companies out there that are focused on doing, better products for older adults. So we're hopefully we'll start to see, especially things, a lot of times though, the things that, if you really are looking out for like canonical products for older adults, it's really funny because a lot of times they're products that are used by, like, the most successful ones are ones that are used by other people, just because a lot of the ones that are directed at that market tend to be overly medicalized, remind of limitations, and there are downsides to those too.
And part of it is the stigma of, like, if you create, so for example, if you create a product, if they called the OXO Good Grips product like the senior potato peeler, and I'm just throwing this out, all of a sudden you've attached a label to it that makes that not a good product for older adults, and I know I'm babbling here. So I think that that in general, good design is universal design, that it simplifies everything for all of us.
Absolutely. And again, I think somebody in the comments said, you can't use universal design everywhere. Sometimes there are going to be people who have certain issues, but even then it's like, you want to focus on, hey, how can we make this personalizable? How can we make this something that people own that doesn't feel like there's a stigma attached to it? And that's not easy in all cases. And maybe it's more difficult in others, but we could certainly be doing a lot better job than we are now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think if you talk to any of the folks that specialize in universal design in our homes, they will all tell you that one of the beauties of safe and accessible home design is that it can be customized to the user, but it can be applicable to a future home buyer as well. But the more that we can adapt to somebody that can't function sort of in a traditional environment as independently, the better it is for all of us. let's see, is it, Kathleen has a question, and you guys may know, is there a source for the most usable products? Like, yeah, is there sort of a contest that happens every year or something like that?
There's definitely groups out there that are focused on it. I'm blanking on, I don't know if I'm sure there are usability awards for older adults that go out there. One group that I know that does a pretty good job, if you've ever heard of Longevity Explorers, they've got like a really cool, they do product reviews and things like that by real people, that's awesome. But I don't know if there's a definitive source out there for like, what are the most usable products, or at least I'm not aware of it, which doesn't mean it doesn't exist. But
hey, one of the things that I like about these discussions is it sort of sometimes amplifies blind spots, and it's like, who knows, maybe this is something that we can begin playing around with our community in terms of what are products that people like using, and share and give them kudos. Holy cow. Well, we've been talking for over an hour, but I want to glance through these comments here. So many great comments, and just reminding everybody that we will share all these comments and the recording online. And I'm saying this to all those folks that are on LinkedIn. Wow, this is very impressive. Thank you all for joining us on LinkedIn. And I will make sure to better include being inclusionary of everybody for future discussions, because I didn't realize how much activity was going there. Let's see, I'm looking here. Oh, Tara Ballman from the National Aging in Place Council is working on something to recognize products. And Margot says that that AARP also has panelists for product reviews. The Canadian Association of Occupational Therapists also has a product recognition. So yeah, maybe I'll surf around there, or share, if you guys have links to that, I'll add it to the page with the recording of this discussion. And one of the things that as you were talking, and you were talking about instructions, it's interesting, because what you can see that may happen is that somebody designs a great product, and they go through the usability, and they're so excited because they got this great product, but then they don't go through the usability on the instructions, and that needs to go through the same usability test as the interesting invention.
Absolutely. Yeah. You want to test everything that people might be interacting with, and then the best instructions are no instructions, and having something that's so usable that you don't need it, but you could end up being a little bit like the iPhone with all the secret functionality if you go too far down that path.
Yeah. A product that we featured early on when we did these discussions that I'm going to invite back because of this conversation is the GrandPad. And it's this is an iPad, again, designed specifically for an older adult audience, let's say. But one thing that really impressed me was the amount of iterations that they went through in their packaging and their instructions. And I remember on the discussion, they showed us how easy it was to open the box and how somebody could literally be up and going. And it's easy to get support as well. So I may invite them back, because it's been several years, and with a focus on their design now that we've had this conversation. Well, holy cow, this has been great. And there's so much that is, so many great comments there. And you guys really presented something that's very thought-provoking and a solution for us. And for the folks that are maybe in traditional businesses in senior living, like home care or retirement communities or care management, that might be in the audience listening for your clients, you can apply this approach and modify it for anything that you're delivering. Like, don't think about it just as a product. This can be applying an approach to how do people experience the intake with my home healthcare agency, and applying this approach. Am I correct? Like, that's the overall profession of user experience, right? Okay. I'm taking that I get Jason and Chris's validation on that.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
Steve, absolutely. You know, a lot of these fundamentals and these principles can apply to whenever you're thinking about whatever your product is. It's all about how do we ensure that we're following the right structured approach to ensuring this is exactly what our users need. Understanding all the different stakeholders and the end-to-end process, not just the time they're using the product, but the time that's off peak. And so you're absolutely right. There's a very systematic approach towards doing these things. And as product developers, as administrators of senior living facilities, a lot of times there's a lot happening, but it's really important to ensure that before we deploy these expensive resources, we double down on investments, we're following this process that gives us the confidence that we are delivering products that our users, our customers, our people demand.
All right. Well, thanks so much. I knew this was going to go over an hour. I look forward to having you all back, because we might be able to dive into this topic in a little bit more detail, or maybe even profile somebody that has sort of gone through this process with their product. Would be very interesting. So thanks so much. Again, thank you to our audience with all these great comments and questions that you brought up. They've been going so fast and furious, I can't read them, so I'm going to have to look at them again. Thanks to our LinkedIn audience. You guys are going crazy there too on this topic. And we'll see y'all after Thanksgiving. Everybody have a happy holidays and enjoy the break.
Thanks so much, Steve. Thanks, everyone.